The morning fog hung thick over the Norman hedgerows on July 18, 1944, as Hauptmann Georg Steiner pressed his eye against the observation scope of his Panther tank. The 32-year-old commander of the 2nd Company, 9th Panzer Division, had been positioned in a defensive line near the village of Cagny for 3 days, waiting for the expected Allied armored thrust. Through years of combat on the Eastern Front and now in France, Steiner had developed an almost instinctive ability to assess enemy armor. What he saw emerging through the mist that morning would fundamentally alter everything he believed about German tactical superiority. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Rolling toward his position came not the handful of tanks he expected, but what appeared to be an endless procession of American M4 Shermans. Dozens of them. Then scores. The sight should have filled him with confidence. After all, Steiner and every other German tank commander had been repeatedly assured that the Sherman was a primitive, undergunned machine that German Panzers would dispatch with ease. Generaloberst Heinz Guderian himself had referred to the Sherman in a training briefing as a mechanical abortion, a product of American industrial incompetence that prioritized speed of production over combat capability. German tankers had even developed a contemptuous nickname for it, the Ronson, after the cigarette lighter, because it supposedly lit up on the first strike. Yet as Steiner watched this massive formation maneuver with practiced precision, something felt profoundly wrong. These tanks were not behaving like the timid, poorly coordinated vehicles described in German intelligence reports. They moved with purpose, maintaining formation, covering each other's advances. More troubling still, their sheer numbers suggested a level of industrial production that contradicted everything German high command had told him about American manufacturing limitations. Steiner turned to his gunner, Unteroffizier Klaus Richter, a veteran who had knocked out 17 Soviet tanks at Kursk. "How many do you count?" Richter's voice came back steady but with an undercurrent of something Steiner had never heard from him before, uncertainty. "I stopped counting at 40, Herr Hauptmann. They keep coming." The contempt that Georg Steiner and thousands of other German tank commanders held for the Sherman was not accidental. It was the product of a carefully constructed narrative that had been woven into every level of German armored doctrine since the first intelligence reports about American tank production reached Berlin in 1942. This narrative served multiple purposes, bolstering German morale, justifying strategic decisions, and maintaining faith in German engineering supremacy even as the tide of war began to turn against the Reich. The genesis of this contempt could be traced to the technical specifications themselves. On paper, the comparison between German and American armor appeared to validate every assumption about Teutonic superiority. The standard M4 Sherman mounted a 75mm gun and had frontal armor ranging from 50 to 76mm in thickness. By contrast, the German Panther tank featured an 88mm gun capable of penetrating over 100mm of armor at 1,000 meters, with frontal glassy armor up to 80mm thick set at a sharp angle that effectively doubled its resistance to penetration. The Tiger, Germany's heavy tank, was even more formidable with its 88mm high-velocity gun and frontal armor reaching 100mm in thickness. These numbers told a compelling story to German commanders schooled in the belief that superior engineering would overcome material disadvantages. Major Wilhelm Hauptmann, an instructor at the Panzer Training School in Erlangen, had built his entire curriculum around this principle. In lectures delivered to officer candidates throughout 1943 and early 1944, Hauptmann emphasized what he called the mathematics of armor supremacy. One German tank, he would tell his students, was worth 3 or 4 Allied tanks in combat effectiveness. The Sherman, he insisted, was essentially a lightly armored box on treads, designed for mass production rather than battlefield survival. American tankers, Hauptmann claimed, were essentially driving to their deaths in vehicles that represented the triumph of quantity over quality. This assessment was reinforced by carefully selected combat reports from North Africa and Italy. German after-action reports highlighted instances where Panthers and Tigers had destroyed multiple Shermans with minimal losses. What these reports conveniently omitted were the contexts of those engagements, the tactical situations, terrain advantages, and most critically, the overall attrition rates that told a very different story. Oberst Martin Dietrich, commander of the 8th Panzer Regiment, had participated in several of these engagements in Italy during the spring of 1944. His official reports dutifully emphasized German kills and downplayed losses, but his personal letters to his wife told a more nuanced story. In a letter dated May 3, 1944, Dietrich wrote to his wife in Stuttgart, "We destroyed 6 American tanks today with the loss of only 1 Panther. The High Command will call this a great victory, and in the immediate sense it is. Yet I cannot help but notice that the Americans replaced their 6 tanks within days, while our single Panther loss took 3 weeks to replace. They fight as if their tanks are expendable tools rather than precious assets. This troubles me in ways I cannot fully express in a letter that may be read by censors." Dietrich's observation touched upon a reality that German doctrine struggled to acknowledge. The Sherman was designed with a fundamentally different philosophy than German armor. Where German tanks prioritized individual combat superiority, often at the cost of mechanical reliability and production complexity, the Sherman emphasized reliability, ease of maintenance, and above all, the ability to be produced in massive quantities. A single Tiger tank required approximately 300,000 man-hours to manufacture and assemble. A Sherman required roughly 10,000. The implications of this disparity would prove catastrophic for German armored forces, but in the spring and early summer of 1944, those implications remained largely invisible to commanders like Georg Steiner. The German army's internal propaganda reinforced these technical assessments with broader ideological claims about American industrial culture. According to this narrative, Americans were fundamentally incapable of producing weapons of true quality because their society valued profit over excellence, speed over precision, and democratic mediocrity over aristocratic craftsmanship. This narrative found particularly fertile ground among officers who had been educated in the interwar period when German engineering had indeed led the world in many fields. Men like Generalleutnant Leo von Schweppenberg, who commanded Panzer Group West during the Normandy campaign, genuinely believed that German technical training and industrial tradition gave them an insurmountable advantage over adversaries he viewed as lacking in martial culture and engineering discipline. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Von Schweppenberg's intelligence assessments of Allied armor, circulated to his divisional commanders in June 1944, reflected this bias with startling clarity. The American Sherman tank represents the industrialization of warfare taken to its logical extreme, mass production of an adequate but uninspired design. Our Panthers and Tigers represent the opposite philosophy, smaller numbers of truly superior weapons wielded by superior soldiers. History will vindicate our approach. One cannot win wars by drowning the enemy in mediocre equipment operated by poorly trained crews. This assessment would be tested in the most brutal way possible during the coming weeks. The German armor doctrine that had evolved over 5 years of warfare placed enormous emphasis on the technical superiority of individual tanks and the tactical skill of their crews. Tank commanders like Steiner spent years training to maximize the capabilities of their vehicles, learning to exploit their superior optics, more powerful guns, and heavier armor. This training was not wasted. German tank crews were indeed among the most skilled in the world. But this skill-centric doctrine contained a fatal flaw that would only become apparent when confronted with the American approach to armored warfare. The Americans had developed what German commanders derisively called the swarm tactic, using multiple Shermans to overwhelm individual German tanks through coordinated attacks from multiple angles. German tactical doctrine had prepared for this to some extent, but the scale on which the Americans could deploy tanks exceeded even the most pessimistic German estimates. Lieutenant Peter Hoffmann, a platoon commander in the 12th SS Panzer Division, encountered this reality during the battles around Caen in early July. His after-action report, filed on July 9, captured the growing unease among frontline tank commanders. Engaged enemy armor at approximately 1400 hours near Hill 112, Hoffmann wrote in the terse military style required by regulations. Initial assessment counted 12 Sherman tanks advancing in 2 waves. My platoon of 4 Panthers engaged from prepared positions with clear fields of fire. We destroyed 5 enemy tanks in the opening minutes of contact. Standard doctrine suggested the enemy would withdraw to reassess. Instead, additional Shermans continued to advance. Final count estimated 28 enemy tanks committed to this single engagement. We destroyed 14 confirmed before withdrawing due to ammunition depletion and the loss of 2 Panthers. The enemy's willingness to accept losses to achieve positional advantage suggests either incompetent leadership or resources so abundant that individual tank losses are considered acceptable costs. Hoffmann's report exemplified the cognitive dissonance beginning to affect German tank commanders. Their doctrine insisted that the side with superior equipment and training should prevail. Yet they were encountering an enemy who seemed indifferent to the mathematical calculations that formed the basis of German tactical thinking. The Americans were fighting a different kind of war, one where the loss of 2 or 3 Shermans to destroy a single Panther was considered a favorable exchange because they could replace those Shermans far more quickly than Germany could replace the Panther. This American approach bewildered German commanders who had built their entire tactical framework around the assumption that preserving expensive, difficult-to-replace armor was paramount. Oberst Franz Weber, operations officer for the 2nd Panzer Division, expressed this bewilderment in a staff meeting on July 12. A transcript of the meeting survived in division records. "The Americans fight as if they have an infinite supply of tanks," Weber told his fellow officers. "They probe our positions with small groups, identify our strong points, then mass their armor against our weakest sectors. When we concentrate to meet these attacks, they shift to another sector. They are not trying to achieve local superiority through better tanks or better tactics. They are achieving it through sheer numbers and an apparently inexhaustible logistical system." One of the division's company commanders, Hauptmann Rudolf Klein, responded with the conventional wisdom that still dominated German thinking. "Let them come in their hundreds. Each Panther can destroy 3 or 4 Shermans before being knocked out. The mathematics favor us." Weber's response was telling. "That is true, Hauptmann. But I have reviewed the replacement schedules. When we lose a Panther, it takes an average of 5 weeks to receive a replacement, if we receive one at all. Intelligence suggests the Americans are receiving new tanks within days of losses. Who does the mathematics favor when viewed over weeks and months rather than individual engagements?" The meeting fell into uncomfortable silence because Weber had articulated a truth that contradicted the fundamental assumptions underlying German armor doctrine. The entire German approach to tank warfare had been predicated on achieving qualitative superiority to offset numerical inferiority. This approach had worked brilliantly in the early years of the war when German tanks were indeed technically superior and German opponents lacked the industrial capacity to replace losses quickly. But by the summer of 1944, the Germans were facing an opponent who had largely closed the technical gap while maintaining an overwhelming advantage in production capacity. The Sherman, for all its perceived flaws, had evolved significantly since its introduction. The later models featured improved armor, better guns including the 76mm high-velocity cannon, and most importantly, a mechanical reliability that German tanks could not match. A Sherman could be expected to travel 200 miles between major mechanical failures. A Panther, despite its superior firepower and armor, averaged less than 100 miles before requiring significant maintenance. In the fluid, mobile warfare characterizing the campaign in France, this reliability difference proved nearly as important as firepower or armor protection. Feldwebel Ernst Becker, a veteran maintenance sergeant with the 16th Panzer Division, witnessed this disparity from a different perspective than the combat commanders. His job was to keep German tanks operational, a task that grew increasingly difficult as the campaign progressed. In his technical diary, maintained against regulations but preserved in family papers after the war, Becker recorded the mounting maintenance crisis with brutal honesty. July 15, 1944. Received 3 Panthers returned from engagement near Maltat. 2 have thrown tracks, common problem with the interleaved wheel design that General Guderian insisted upon for superior weight distribution. In muddy conditions, debris packs between the wheels and freezes the track. Complete disassembly required, a 12-hour job per tank with a full crew. The 3rd Panther has transmission failure, also common. The engine and transmission must be removed as a single unit through the front hull, requiring specialized equipment we do not have at the field level. This tank must be sent to depot maintenance, which means it is effectively lost to the division for weeks. I have heard that American tank crews can replace a Sherman engine in the field in under 12 hours using standard equipment. Our superior engineering has created machines that are maintenance nightmares. Becker's observations highlighted a paradox at the heart of German tank design. The pursuit of technical superiority had created vehicles that were simultaneously more powerful and more fragile than their supposedly inferior American counterparts. The Panther's interleaved road wheel system did indeed provide superior weight distribution and smoother ride characteristics. It also created a maintenance liability that reduced the number of operational tanks available for combat at any given time. Similarly, the Panther's powerful Maybach engine provided excellent performance, but its complexity and the precision manufacturing required for its components meant that it was far more prone to breakdown than the simpler, more robust engines powering American tanks. These technical realities were creating an attrition dynamic that contradicted German expectations. In a typical week of combat in Normandy, a German Panzer Division might lose 10 to 15 tanks to enemy action. Of these, perhaps 5 would be complete write-offs, unsalvageable due to catastrophic damage. The remainder could theoretically be recovered and repaired. However, the combination of Allied air superiority, which made daylight recovery operations extremely dangerous, and the maintenance complexity of German tanks meant that actual recovery and repair rates rarely exceeded 30%. Meanwhile, the same division might have another 5 to 10 tanks out of action due to mechanical failures, creating a constant drain on operational strength that had nothing to do with enemy action. The Americans, by contrast, were demonstrating recovery and maintenance capabilities that German commanders found almost incomprehensible. Lieutenant Heinrich Vogel, captured on July 20 during fighting near St. Lo, provided a detailed account during his interrogation of American maintenance operations he had observed before his capture. I was in an observation post overlooking an American supply area for 2 days before our position was overrun, Vogel told his interrogators. I watched them bring in damaged tanks on tank transporters. These were not lightly damaged vehicles. Some were missing tracks, others had visible penetrations in their armor. I expected these tanks to be written off or sent to rear area depots. Instead, I watched American maintenance crews swarm over them. They worked in shifts, 24 hours a day. They replaced entire engines, swapped out damaged components, repaired armor with welding equipment. Within 48 hours, I saw tanks that I would have considered total losses returning to service. The speed and efficiency were unlike anything I have witnessed in our own maintenance operations. Vogel's account was corroborated by numerous other German prisoners and by intelligence reports compiled from aerial reconnaissance. The Americans had created a logistical and maintenance system of extraordinary efficiency, one that could sustain high operational rates even in the face of heavy combat losses. This system was made possible partly by the Sherman's design, which deliberately prioritized maintainability and parts commonality, and partly by the vast industrial resources the United States could dedicate to support operations. The final element of German misconception about the Sherman involved crew quality and training. German doctrine held that superior training and veteran experience would allow skilled crews to overcome material disadvantages. There was truth to this. A well-trained crew could significantly enhance the effectiveness of any tank. But German assumptions about American tanker quality proved to be another comfortable myth. Hauptmann Georg Steiner, whose observations open this account, gained first-hand appreciation of American crew quality during an engagement on July 25 near Ronson. Steiner's Panther had achieved a good firing position overlooking a road where American armor was advancing. His crew had already destroyed 2 Shermans when a third tank, rather than retreating or attempting to maneuver away, rapidly backed into a hull-down position behind a low ridge, exposing only its turret. The American tank then engaged in a duel with Steiner's Panther, systematically targeting the German tank's weak points. The American crew's first shot struck the Panther's gun mantlet, a small, difficult target that suggested either extraordinary luck or considerable skill. The shot did not penetrate, but it damaged the mantlet mechanism, temporarily jamming Steiner's gun. While his gunner worked to clear the jam, the American tank fired again, this time striking the Panther's side armor as Steiner attempted to angle his vehicle for a better position. This shot penetrated, killing Steiner's loader and wounding his driver. Steiner ordered his crew to abandon the tank. In his report after reaching German lines, Steiner made an observation that contradicted years of propaganda about American fighting qualities. The enemy crew that engaged us demonstrated tactical awareness and gunnery skill equal to our own. They identified and exploited a weakness in the Panther's armor scheme that I had believed was known only to our own technical services. They fired with precision under pressure and made tactically sound decisions throughout the engagement. This was not the performance of poorly trained, inexperienced crews we were told to expect from American tankers. Steiner's experience was not unique. Across the Normandy front during July and August 1944, German tank commanders were discovering that American crews, while perhaps lacking the multi-year combat experience of German veterans, were far better trained than German intelligence had suggested. The United States had created training programs that produced competent tank crews at scale, another application of American industrial thinking to military problems. Where German training emphasized individual excellence, requiring months or even years to produce fully trained crews, American training focused on standardized competence that could be achieved in weeks. This approach allowed the Americans to replace crew losses quickly while maintaining acceptable performance standards. By late July 1944, the cumulative effect of these discoveries was creating a profound unease among German armored commanders in Normandy. The comfortable certainties that had sustained their confidence were eroding in the face of battlefield realities. They possessed better tanks in terms of firepower and armor protection. This remained true. But the Americans possessed more tanks, tanks that were more reliable, supported by superior logistics and maintenance, and crewed by adequately trained personnel who could replace losses at a rate German forces could not match. The mathematical superiority that German doctrine promised was being overwhelmed by an American approach to warfare that simply did not accept the premises on which German calculations were based. The stage was set for a devastating demonstration of American industrial and logistical superiority that would shatter German armored strength in France and expose the fatal flaws in Nazi military thinking. What German generals had mocked as primitive and inferior was about to destroy their panzer divisions not through superior technology, but through the remorseless application of mass production and logistical excellence. The Sherman would prove that in modern industrial warfare, adequate equipment produced in overwhelming quantities and supported by excellent logistics could defeat technically superior weapons constrained by production limitations and maintenance nightmares. The catastrophic unraveling of German armored power in France began not with a single dramatic battle but through a steady hemorrhaging of tanks that German industry could not replace. Operation Cobra, launched by American forces on July 25, 1944, initiated a breakout from the Normandy beachhead that exposed the fundamental bankruptcy of German assumptions about armored warfare. Within days, the carefully constructed mythology about Sherman inferiority collided with a reality so devastating that it would force a complete reassessment of German military doctrine. Oberst Karl Fischer commanded what remained of the 21st Panzer Division during the initial American breakthrough near St. Lo. His division had entered the Normandy campaign in June with over 100 operational tanks. By the morning of July 25, that number had dwindled to 38, a combination of combat losses, mechanical failures, and tanks awaiting repair that would never come. Fischer's defensive positions were well prepared, his remaining crews were experienced, and he had received assurances from Corps headquarters that American armor, hampered by Norman terrain and their inferior Shermans, could not achieve a decisive breakthrough. The reality that confronted Fischer shattered those assurances within hours. American artillery preparation, more intense than anything he had experienced on the Eastern Front, preceded the armor assault. When the Shermans came, they came not in the small company-sized formations that German tactical doctrine anticipated, but in battalion-strength waves supported by infantry, aircraft, and mobile artillery. Fischer's after-action report, one of the last coherent documents to emerge from the collapsing German front, captured the shock of that encounter with clinical precision. Enemy armor assault commenced at approximately 0930 hours following sustained artillery preparation. Initial observation estimated 60 to 80 Sherman tanks advancing on a 3-kilometer front. Our defensive positions engaged at maximum range. We achieved multiple hits and confirmed kills. Enemy advance did not falter. Second wave of equal strength appeared within 15 minutes. Our ammunition expenditure rate exceeded resupply capability within first hour of engagement. By 1100 hours, my command had been reduced to 11 operational tanks. Enemy continued to advance with fresh units. The tactical situation became untenable. Surviving elements withdrew to secondary positions which no longer existed, having been overrun by enemy exploitation forces. The scale of enemy armor commitment exceeded all intelligence estimates by a factor of 3 or more. Fischer's experience was replicated across the entire German defensive line. American armored divisions, each equipped with over 200 tanks and supported by overwhelming air power and artillery, simply overwhelmed German positions through sustained pressure that German forces had no capacity to resist. The mathematics that German doctrine had promised would favor superior German tanks proved irrelevant when American forces could commit 5 or 6 tanks for every German Panther or Tiger, replace losses within days, and maintain operational tempos that exhausted German defensive capabilities. General Major Heinrich Freiherr von Luttwitz, commanding the 2nd Panzer Division, witnessed the collapse from a higher vantage point that made the strategic implications even more apparent. His division occupied positions intended to block American exploitation toward Avranches. When the American breakthrough occurred, von Luttwitz found his division facing not the exhausted, disorganized enemy forces that German doctrine suggested would result from a major offensive, but fresh American armored units that appeared to have unlimited fuel, ammunition, and replacement vehicles. His report to Panzer Group West headquarters on July 28 conveyed both tactical detail and a dawning strategic horror. American armored forces have achieved operational freedom of movement. Their advance units are ranging up to 30 kilometers behind our nominal front lines. Each incursion we counter is replaced by another at a different location. Our mobile reserves, intended to contain and destroy breakthrough forces, are being engaged and destroyed piecemeal. The enemy's logistical capabilities appear limitless. Captured American supply dumps contain fuel, ammunition, and spare parts in quantities that exceed our divisional allocation for an entire month. We are not fighting a conventional armored battle. We are attempting to stem a flood with sandbags. Unless immediate reinforcement of at least 5 full-strength panzer divisions arrives within 48 hours, the entire front in this sector will collapse. The reinforcements von Luttwitz requested did not exist. The German army in France was fighting with the forces it had, and those forces were being systematically destroyed by an enemy whose industrial capacity allowed it to sustain losses that would have crippled any other army. The Falaise Pocket, formed in August as American and British forces encircled retreating German units, became a killing ground that demonstrated the final bankruptcy of German armored doctrine. Oberleutnant Werner Hoffmann, operations officer for the 9th SS Panzer Division, survived the pocket and provided testimony during Allied interrogation that revealed the psychological impact of this defeat. "We entered the pocket with 42 tanks," Hoffmann stated in a voice his interrogators described as emotionally flat, almost dissociated. "We were ordered to break through American encirclement to the south. Our reconnaissance indicated American forces holding the corridor consisted primarily of Sherman tanks, exactly the enemy we had been assured our Panthers could defeat with ease. The breakout began at dawn on August 18. Within 2 hours, we had lost 31 tanks. Not to enemy fire alone, though that was devastating enough. Tanks broke down under the strain of continuous movement. We had no fuel to recover them. We had no ammunition to continue fighting. We had no replacement parts because the supply columns that should have sustained us had been destroyed days earlier by American aircraft. The Shermans we were told to despise pursued us like wolves hunting exhausted prey. They did not need to be superior tanks. They simply needed to keep coming, and they did, endlessly. The numbers emerging from the Normandy campaign told a story that German high command could no longer ignore or rationalize. Between June 6 and August 25, 1944, German armored forces in France lost approximately 6,000 tanks and assault guns. This figure represented not merely battlefield losses but the complete destruction of German mobile warfare capability in the West. The Americans and British, despite sustaining significant armor losses of their own, maintained operational strength throughout the campaign through continuous replacement of vehicles and crews. A Sherman destroyed on Monday was replaced by Thursday. A Panther destroyed on Monday might be replaced in 6 weeks, if replacement production could catch up with losses, which it increasingly could not. Hauptmann Ernst Baumann, a logistics officer with the 7th Army, experienced the collapse from the perspective of a man responsible for sustaining forces that could no longer be sustained. His personal papers, discovered in archives decades after the war, provided insight into the systematic breakdown of German armored logistics under pressure they were never designed to withstand. August 10, 1944. Received requisition from 12th SS Panzer Division for 40 replacement tank engines, 200 track sections, 50 main gun barrels, and assorted mechanical components. Current depot inventory: 3 engines, 15 track sections, no gun barrels. Estimated time to fulfill requisition from Reich production: 8 to 12 weeks, assuming production facilities remain operational and transportation routes remain intact. Neither assumption appears valid. Informed division headquarters that requested materials cannot be provided. Response was predictable outrage and demands I explain how they are expected to maintain combat effectiveness without basic supplies. I have no answer. The system has failed. We are asking our panzer divisions to fight with equipment we cannot maintain. The maintenance crisis Baumann documented represented a dimension of the Sherman's superiority that German planners had completely failed to anticipate. The Sherman's mechanical reliability, dismissed as a symptom of primitive engineering, proved to be a decisive advantage in sustained operations. A Sherman could operate for weeks with minimal maintenance. A Panther required constant attention from skilled mechanics using specialized tools and parts that German logistics could no longer provide in adequate quantities. The result was a steady erosion of German operational strength that had nothing to do with combat effectiveness and everything to do with industrial capacity and logistics. American maintenance capabilities created an additional disparity that compounded German disadvantages. Feldwebel Gustav Lehmann, a recovery vehicle operator captured in late August, described his exposure to American maintenance operations with something approaching awe. I was held in a temporary prisoner enclosure adjacent to an American tank maintenance facility for 3 days. I watched their procedures with professional interest. They had specialized equipment for every task. Tank transporters to recover damaged vehicles. Mobile repair shops with complete machine tools. Replacement parts organized and cataloged with American efficiency. Most remarkable was the speed. I watched them completely rebuild a Sherman transmission in under 6 hours. The same job on a Panther would take our best mechanics 2 days, assuming we had the replacement transmission, which we usually did not. The Americans treated their tanks like machinery to be maintained and replaced. We treated ours like precious artifacts to be preserved. Their approach proved more effective. The philosophical difference Lehmann identified reflected fundamentally different approaches to industrial warfare. German doctrine, rooted in pre-industrial concepts of warfare as a test of martial virtue and technical excellence, had created an armored force optimized for conditions that no longer existed. The Americans had created a system optimized for the realities of modern industrial war, where victory belonged to the side that could generate, sustain, and replace military power faster than the enemy could destroy it. The Sherman, derided as primitive by German generals, was actually the product of sophisticated industrial thinking that prioritized the factors that mattered most in sustained operations. The human cost of German miscalculation manifested in thousands of individual tragedies as panzer crews discovered that superior vehicles could not protect them from overwhelming numbers and logistical collapse. Lieutenant Franz Weber commanded a Tiger tank, the vehicle German propaganda portrayed as invincible, during the fighting around Mordheim in early August. His tank was indeed nearly impervious to frontal attack by Shermans. This technical superiority proved meaningless when American tactics emphasized flanking attacks, airstrikes, and artillery rather than frontal duels. Weber's Tiger was disabled by aircraft rockets on August 7. He and his crew survived and began the long retreat toward Germany on foot, their invincible tank abandoned for lack of recovery equipment and fuel. Weber's account, recorded during a post-war interview, captured the bitter irony of German technical superiority. "We had the best tank on the battlefield. Its armor could withstand anything the Shermans could fire at us from the front. Its gun could destroy any Allied tank at ranges where they could not effectively return fire. None of this mattered because the Americans simply bypassed us, called in their aircraft, and destroyed us from above. Or they brought up 5 or 6 Shermans and hit us from multiple angles simultaneously. Our Tiger could defeat any single Sherman. It could not defeat 6 at once while under artillery fire and air attack. The technical superiority we were promised became irrelevant against an enemy who refused to fight the kind of battle our superiority was designed to win." The collapse of German armor in France exposed another uncomfortable truth. The vaunted German tactical skill, real enough in the early war years, had been degraded by years of attrition that killed or captured the most experienced crews. By the summer of 1944, many German tank crews were hastily trained replacements facing American crews who, while perhaps less experienced in absolute terms, were adequately trained and supported by overwhelming material advantages. Oberst Dietrich von Koltitz, military commander of Paris, observed this dynamic during the final days before the city's liberation. The panzer units defending the approaches to Paris bore little resemblance to the elite formations that conquered France in 1940. The crews were young, inadequately trained, and equipped with vehicles they barely knew how to maintain. They faced American tankers who may not have possessed the theoretical tactical excellence of our 1940 vintage crews, but who had something more valuable: confidence born of material superiority and repeated success. Our men knew that when their tank was destroyed or disabled, no replacement would come. The Americans knew that losses would be made good within days. This psychological difference proved as decisive as any technical factor. The statistical analysis compiled by German intelligence in September 1944 painted a picture of comprehensive defeat that could no longer be rationalized or explained away. German armored strength in the West had been effectively destroyed. Of the approximately 1,500 tanks present in Normandy on June 6, fewer than 100 escaped back to Germany. Production could not keep pace with losses. The Reich was producing approximately 300 tanks per month against losses that now exceeded 500 monthly. More damning still, the quality gap that German doctrine had relied upon to offset numerical inferiority had largely disappeared. The later model Shermans, equipped with improved guns and thicker armor, were only marginally inferior to Panthers in combat effectiveness while maintaining massive advantages in reliability and supportability. General Major Alfred Jodl, operations chief of the German High Command, received a comprehensive assessment from Armored Forces Command in early September that acknowledged realities German leadership had resisted for months. The report, preserved in captured documents, represented a remarkable admission of systemic failure. The campaign in France has demonstrated that our assumptions regarding American armor were fundamentally incorrect. The Sherman tank, which our intelligence and propaganda dismissed as inferior, has proven adequate for its tactical purpose when employed in the numbers American industry can produce. Our Panthers and Tigers, while superior in individual combat, cannot be produced or maintained at rates sufficient to offset American numerical superiority. More critically, the American logistical system supporting their armor is vastly superior to our own. They maintain higher operational rates, achieve faster repair times, and sustain continuous operations at tempos we cannot match. The fundamental premise of our armored doctrine, that qualitative superiority would overcome quantitative disadvantage, has been invalidated. We cannot win an attrition war against American industrial capacity. The human stories emerging from the wreckage of German armored power in France revealed the personal toll of strategic miscalculation. George Steiner, whose observations open this account, survived the Normandy campaign but lost his entire crew when his third Panther of the campaign was destroyed by American fighter bombers near Argenton on August 16. He spent the final months of the war commanding a training unit in Bavaria, teaching tactics for vehicles that no longer existed in meaningful numbers. His letters to his family during this period reflected a profound disillusionment with the leadership that had led German armor to destruction through willful blindness to reality. They told us the Sherman was a primitive machine that our superior tanks would sweep aside, Steiner wrote in October 1944. What they did not tell us was that primitive machines produced in vast numbers and supported by excellent logistics would prove more effective than sophisticated machines we could neither produce in adequate quantities nor maintain in the field. They promised us quality would triumph over quantity. They were wrong, and thousands of my fellow tank commanders paid for that error with their lives. The Sherman did not defeat us through technical superiority. It defeated us through the patient application of industrial might against which our vaunted German engineering proved helpless. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.